Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to focus on speaking slowly and standing in the right spot. I'm Samantha Goldman, and I am an associate professor of special education at Assumption University, which is in Worcester, Massachusetts, or Worcester, as it looks like if you're not from the area. And I'm a former special educator and became interested in the area of alternative dispute resolution based on my experiences working in schools, and went on to get my PhD in special ed from Vanderbilt, which was where I became involved with the Volunteer Advocacy Project, which we'll be talking about today. And so my research interests continue to focus on building family school partnerships and working on some of those alternative dispute resolution options.
And I'm Amy Holbert, and I am the CEO of Family Connection of South Carolina. We're South Carolina's Parent Training and Information Center. And I have two sons that have different abilities. And I I'm a clinical pediatric social worker by training.
Great. And just to get a quick sense, we already asked a few of you in the room, but how many of you are from parent support organizations? Parent Center, any sort of organization that provides support for families. Are you also? Okay, great, thank you. So that was a Part C agency for Mississippi. We are live streaming today, and so we definitely encourage participation. Please raise your hands during, you don't need to wait until the end, especially given the size of our group. We hope that this can be conversational. However, I will either ask you to speak into the microphone or I will repeat what you say so that those folks who are joining us online can get the full benefit. So I'm going to start us off and talk a little bit about the background of the Volunteer Advocacy Project, and I'm kind of wearing the researcher hat, and then Amy will present on her organization's experience with replicating this program. We also worked with another family support organization that was originally supposed to be joining us, and then with the 2-year delay over time, unfortunately, that was not going to be possible this year, but we'll be sharing some of their experiences based on an interview that I conducted with them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time today talking about the barriers to parent advocacy. I know that everybody in the room is quite familiar, and you are here for a reason. We just came from an amazing parent panel where if we needed a reminder, and if it hadn't come up enough over the last few days, I think it was very clear. I do have a slightly fuzzy Mike Giangreco cartoon over here where it's the one side of the table, as we often experience in IEP meetings, and one of the school staff is saying, "I'm not sure why Mr. Barth always feels compelled to bring an advocate to the IEP meeting." So talk about that power differential. That was just the focus of the last session, right? And I can imagine that how many of you have been in IEP meetings where it looks like this? Yeah. So we know that our goal here in what we're all trying to do, our end goal is to make sure that students with special needs are supported in receiving the services that they need and that we know they're entitled to. And so I'm going to share a little bit more about this program called the Volunteer Advocacy Project. And this program was started by Dr. Megan Burke, who is currently at the University of Illinois. And she started this program when she went to Nashville, Tennessee, went to Vanderbilt for her PhD in 2008. And she was moving there from Illinois. And when she arrived, really noticed a big difference in just access to supports for families. And there are amazing organizations there, but just really saw some differences and wanted to contribute she knew she was going to be there for a while. She knew she wanted to get involved in the community. And so this was a way that she saw that she could contribute. And so she attended, I think actually she was maybe at the COPA conference one year and learned about a few different advocacy trainings. And so she developed the Volunteer Advocacy Project based on 2 trainings at the time. So one is the SEAT training, which still exists, is going strong. And this was started by the USC, USED, and COPA. And how many of you are familiar with the SEAT training? Okay, so just to share a little bit briefly, this is an intensive training. This is a 100+ hour training. There's an internship requirement. It's run over the course of a year. It does have a significant registration fee due to what is provided. And so it's not necessarily something that's accessible to all. It's run typically by attorneys and advocates. So kind of a different thing. And then she also learned about this PLSP training that was run by the PNA in Georgia. And this is really where she got the idea for developing the Volunteer Advocacy Project. Thank you for those of you who joined us. We're happy to have you. Just giving a little bit of background on the Volunteer Advocacy Project, the training that was replicated by a couple of parent organizations. So what is it? What does it look like? Basically, the VAP is a 36-hour training. It can be split up different ways, but typically it's provided in 3-hour sessions over the course of 12 weeks. So weekly sessions, 3-hour sessions. Sometimes we would run them in the mornings, sometimes in evenings, sometimes on weekends, so that each time the training could be accessed by individuals with different schedules, different availability. And so each session, try to make it fun, involves readings, activities, case studies, and then also some didactic instruction. And the training covers content on special ed law. So exactly what you would expect to be covered, talking about evaluation and eligibility, IEP, LRE, with a real focus on non-adversarial advocacy. So the goal that we can work effectively to support families in communicating what their child needs and accessing those services through schools. And the way this was structured is that we had our main site in Nashville through the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. And then in order to provide access to this training for more rural parts of the state, we would live stream it to sites. Basically anywhere somebody said, I want to participate, we would say, this is wonderful. Find a couple of people who are willing to join you, meet at the library, meet in your house, anywhere that you have access to the internet, and then you can all sit together and learn about this. The community building part is a big piece of this. So not a training that we wanted somebody necessarily to be sitting by themselves in their own home, because part of this is building a community of advocates across the state. Our training was not restricted to parents. So this was just a broader advocacy training available to anybody. However, with that said, most of our participants were parents for reasons you can all guess, right? Coming in interested in learning more, advocating for their own children. But another requirement of this program is that we would ask our trainees to volunteer as an advocate for at least 4 families after completing the training. So it was this idea of a pay it forward model, that you don't have to be the highest expert, but that if everybody goes out and supports 4 families as a volunteer for free, can really have a big impact. Tried to keep the costs really low. So initially it was a $30 registration fee. And more recently, it's kind of gone up to $75 with inflation. But this was just to cover the cost of materials. So trying to make this as accessible as possible, offering scholarships as needed.
I just had a question. The 12 sessions, were they done one weekly for 3 hours? Okay.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. So typically we would run it from about August through, we would try to finish before Thanksgiving so we didn't lose people. In Tennessee, the school year starts pretty early. So we could begin end of August, wrap it up before Thanksgiving. And then, we like to offer it at the beginning of the school year. So there was opportunity to put all that into practice and apply those skills. And another benefit that we had running this training through the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center was that free labor, like myself, as a doctoral student was available. So the VAP was usually coordinated by doc students and master's students in the special ed program who, had some experience in the field, and were interested in this area, but were willing and excited to coordinate the program pretty much for free. As many of you know that this takes a lot of work. And so that's a benefit that's not always available when trying to run programs like this through different types of agencies. And one other thing I want to mention is that we would invite experts in to present on different topics. So it wasn't us saying, we are the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center, we're going to run this training and we are going to teach you everything. It was us collaborating with, inviting someone from the ARC to come in, inviting someone from STEP, our PTI, to come in, having someone from our PNA, having Vanderbilt faculty. And so really utilizing that network of experts in this area to help support the program. Right. Any logistical questions about what the original version of the VAP looked like before I talk a little bit about the outcomes of the training? Okay. So how does it work? Why should anybody ever come do this? We have some research that's been conducted to show, first of all, that it works in terms of our program graduates. They learn things about special ed law. That's our number one goal, right? You leave with more knowledge. They leave reporting themselves to be more comfortable with advocating for themselves and for others. More recently, we've started to explore some of the other outcomes of advocacy training. And so some things like people leaving feeling more empowered, that's come out, and something that we're going to look into more in the future. In terms of what do participants think about it, we see good outcomes in that area too. So generally our participants are satisfied both with individual sessions. So, did you like this session on IEPs? Yes, satisfied. And then also satisfied with the overall training in addition to 6 months later or longer. So we're happy to see that. In a long-term follow-up, we also found that 64% of our graduates who we were able to contact said, yes, I went and I advocated for families after the training. So kind of an interesting finding, right? Because we ask everybody to sign their name and say, I will advocate for 4 families after training completion. So I think this brings up, first of all, the differing interpretations of, did I go advocate for someone? So to us, it's not everyone's going to go sit in an IEP meeting. That's not something that we want, but it's, did you support a family navigate their way through the special ed process? But again, generally positive outcomes. We had this 40% of kind of super advocates who had advocated for 10 or more families. So, the full range really of what they were going on to do after training completion. But overall, positive outcomes from our implementation of this training program through the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center with the resources and supports that we had. And so then we started to think about replications of this. And so wouldn't it be nice if this could be extended or if other organizations could take this and do it? And so the first one came to us naturally through some wonderful people who started this nonprofit called Build Inclusion in Kentucky, and they were able to get funding from their USED in Kentucky. So they got a $10,000 seed grant, and they came to us and they said, we heard about this VAP thing and we want to try it. We said, great, I'm happy to work with you. I will share all that I know. And so basically we provided consultation and we gave them the manual and the materials, and we said, go have fun and do it and see how it goes. And we were excited to see that they were able to implement it with 18 participants, and they saw similarly positive outcomes. So their participants were satisfied, they were learning, they were gaining new skills. More recently, so after Dr. Burke left Vanderbilt, she has since been at the University of Illinois. And so she has conducted a few replications of the VAP, both in English and Spanish there. So, and has done a lot of research there. But that really led us to this idea of, great, these are some good initial steps, but can this be replicated? Can agencies take this and do this in a way that's feasible for them and that they can adapt it to make it a good fit for their needs, for their area, for what they're looking for? And so this is where the replication piece comes in. And so I'm going to talk you through a little bit about just the procedures of the replication, and then I'm going to pass it over to Amy for the real fun details about what that looked like for her and her agency. So the boring stuff first. So basically the Family Support Research and Training Center, the FSRTC at the university, I know we have a lot of mouthfuls here. That's why we like our acronyms. At the University of Illinois at Chicago, provided $5,000 in seed funding for a few organizations that were interested in replicating the VAP. These needed to be community-based organizations that supported individuals with disabilities. And so it was really exciting. A lot of organizations applied. I recently was looking at the applications and I just said to Megan, how did you ever pick 2? These just all were amazing. And so she did choose 2 to receive funding. And so these are Family Connection of South Carolina, which is a PTI, and Amy will speak to you about in a few minutes. And then the second was CEDA, which is a CPRC in the New York, New Jersey area that serves Korean-speaking families. And so there also was an organization that decided to conduct the VAP without the seed funding. And so we're not going to talk about that today, but it was encouraging. I do have, they're included, but they're not here with us. So yes.
So I have a couple of questions before you turn it over to Amy. You had mentioned when the students or the participants completed the program and they went on to help advocate or assist families in advocacy beyond the 4 families, right? Some of them are very ambitious, did 10, which is fantastic. I have 2 questions. One, who is monitoring those folks who are out there assisting families? Because we want to make sure that they're not practicing, the unauthorized practice of law. And secondly, is there any kind of stipend or payment offered to these graduates?
Great questions. And thank you for being willing to speak into the microphone so I didn't have to try to repeat it all back. So first part about unauthorized practice of law, definitely something that we are very well aware of. And I think try to avoid by being very clear about that during the training. So we do include one session on dispute resolution, which is very intentionally, we are teaching you about this because you should not be doing these things. And if it gets anywhere near this, this is the time when you say, you know what, this is beyond my scope of practice, or this is beyond what I know anything about. And so let me help connect you with other people. So I think there's always a fear of that, and there's always a possibility that that can happen, but we do our best by just educating and trying to make that point very clear about what you can do and what you can't do and where that line is. And it's a very clear line for them. In terms of monitoring, I think this is a distinction that will come up more when we start to hear about the way this works with more when a PTI, for example, is taking this and running it. We have, as the Kennedy Center, had a little bit more freedom to say, we offer you this training, but this is not a certificate. This is not a license. You can go help people, but that's all it is. And it's a tricky thing to navigate. And it's an issue in the field of special ed advocacy that we constantly struggle with and try to manage and navigate. And we've gone through different iterations of this with the VAP, where we've had formal shadowing built in, but then we realized over time, first of all, that's not feasible to do for everybody when you're training, 50 to 100 participants a year. The whole reason for this is because we don't have advocates. And so we're not going to be able to have one for everyone. Second of all, not everybody wants to go out and do that. So as you noted, there's that special little group there. And I think really what it came down to was relationships. So we got to know our participants pretty well. And so you have a sense of who you're going to want to send out to advocate in more formal ways and who you might know about this family and their child and be able to link them up with a family who would really benefit from speaking with someone with similar experiences. I'm going to bring you the microphone.
So my question, I guess, piggybacks off of that conversation. I guess I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the expectations of someone in an advocacy role in terms of what you, I guess, expect in terms of the support level? Because I think that when I'm kind of think of, there's always those people that really want to help, but can kind of cross lines unintentionally. So I guess what I'm curious to know, is there any kind of, I hate to use this term, but like parameters that are set so that someone could understand exactly what you're really looking for when you're saying support? So yeah, so when you're saying that you're training an advocate to be a family support, ideally, what does that look like?
And I think my answer is not great, but it can look like so many things. And I think, let me get back to my right spot. I'm a good rule follower. So I think that within communities, there's a need for such a range of support. And this is a vague term, and it is something that we intentionally leave a little bit broad and vague, because again, for some people, I think support can be, I bumped into a family at my child's school and I talked to her for half an hour outside, and that could be really meaningful support. And for somebody else, they need more formal advocacy support. We've done a little bit of research to look into what is the advocacy, special ed advocacy process, and what are the steps. And there are so many pieces to that, including educating, empowering, and yes, going to an IEP meeting can be a part of that, but there are so many additional things that we do.
And I think that the questions that are coming up, we'll talk about, because they are very good questions, especially if you are in parent centers yourself. And, but from the researcher standpoint, they had written this great curriculum and had this idea around how do we, Dr. Burke came in to a state that she couldn't find help for her own kids. And what am I going to do? And what should that look like? And how do we scale this up? And so, she's taking you kind of through that process, but hold some of those questions, because I think that that's part of what we continue to kind of learn from this, right?
Thank you. Will you hold your question? Do you think it'll come up, or is it?
I'm going to just add something, if I may, and it might be helpful to maybe address your question. So in New Jersey, we have a similar model. It's called Special Education Volunteer Advocates. But one of the things that we did to answer your question, we created a agreement, a document that for those who were vetted and trained out, when they received a family, they needed to read that agreement with that family and set those perimeters so that that family doesn't think, I'm your legal representative, I'm not speaking on your behalf, I'm not an education advocate, but they're solely there for that support piece, which we find parents, sometimes you just sit at a meeting, you don't say a word, and the dynamics change there. So I just wanted to just add that in to kind of answer your question. Okay. And I'm sure that's going to come up with Amy too.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Great. So just briefly to talk about the support that these organizations were given. So basically electronic access to all of the materials, technical assistance calls. So first there were 3 webinars that basically just covered what the Volunteer Advocacy Project looks like, how it works, all the basic information. And then each agency received individual calls with Dr. Burke to talk about how things are going, what obstacles have come up, what are the questions you're asking right now. And then I conducted follow-up interviews with each of the agencies as kind of an external person who wasn't directly involved, to hear about what did the process look like, what were the steps, what do you think were the critical pieces that couldn't be changed, and what were the pieces that you think could and maybe should be changed to better fit your community and your needs. And so with that, we're going to get into the good stuff, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
All right. So I'm Amy, and those are all great questions. And I am going to give you a little bit of information about our center first. And as most of you are probably, it sounds like from parent centers or work with parents. But one thing that I have learned doing this work is that I typically define what the PTI is and who actually qualifies for it, because you go in and just like some of the questions that you're asking, parents and folks get the word advocate or support. There's so many, even the word disability, of course, so many different definitions for that. So I try to define that. So I'm not going to do that for you all but you can read this, but just to let you all know that, and IDEA, the law itself defines what a parent center is. It's not, something that we make up. And what makes parent centers eligible to be a PTI and to apply for that designation is that they have to serve all disabilities. And so that's why, you might not have, for instance, the Autism Society applying for it, and they have to serve kids 0 to 26. And they also have to have over 50% of their board of directors have to have parents of kids that are currently receiving special education under IDEA, or young adults that are receiving it under the ADA. So why was Family Connection looking for this, and how do we kind of get involved in the VAP? First of all, you need to know a little bit about what my organization was doing at the time. And remember, we're talking about a project that started in like 2018, 2019, right? So then we've had COVID. And so sometimes when Dr. Goldman and I are talking, I'll remember, oh gosh, so the work that we've done with the VAP has kind of continued. So you'll hear some of that too. But we are a nonprofit. We've been in business since 1990, and we started out under the Parent to Parent USA. So we're South Carolina's Parent to Parent USA, and that is typically where parents are matched. They're trained to provide support, and it's usually they're matched based on a diagnosis and usually around the age of the child, or they've had a similar circumstance. And as the P2P world kind of grew in the kind of mid 2000s, HRSA came up with funding for the Family to Family Health Information Centers and Family Voices, which is that healthcare arm. So we have that designation as well. And then in our state, there was another nonprofit before I was at Family Connection, and they tried to merge between Family Connection and the PTI, and it didn't work very well. And so these grants are competitive. And so in 2014, they hired me and worked with me, the board of directors, and some of the disability community, and we applied for the PTI. Well, when you get a federal grant, it's like, hello, like today is September 30th and you're not the PTI, but October 1st, you're the PTI. And now you have to know what you're doing, and everything you've written in your grant, you have to do, right? And so we wrote the initial grant. I call it our Med Sped World, right? Because as our center, typically we will get referrals initially. Families come to us at different transition time periods, like many of you, over the course of the life of their child. So a lot of times they get diagnosed in the beginning, right? So when they're young, 0 to 3. And so most of our referrals are actually for birth to 5. Now that we've been the PTI for a couple of years, we're seeing that average age kind of creep up to 7 or 8, but that makes sense, but about 76%. So when we became the PTI, one of the things that was really important to me was that we do things that are evidence-based. I looked for trainings, around special education, because that's what we're supposed to do, is train families about, provide workshops and trainings about how to advocate for themselves, educating on SPED and those kinds of things. But we didn't have those pre-made resources, right? So we were able to build on some of the healthcare work that we had done and the work around parents, but we really needed to take a look at what we were going to do. And also, just to let you all know that we started out when I got there at about 20 full-time employees. And the biggest prerequisite for working at Family Connection at that time was that you were a parent of a child with a disability. And it didn't matter like your background or your education, because that's, the scope of practice was to be matched with somebody to provide that type of support. And then when we got the PTI, and that special education information is pretty cumbersome and difficult. And there's a lot of guidelines, and you don't want to go. And so we were really starting from scratch. We didn't get a whole lot. There was not another PTI in the area that was like, hey, look, it wasn't like states were saying, here's your starting point. Here's my training. I'm going to give it to you. Nobody was doing that for us. So I started off on this journey and doing what we needed to do. So I'm going to give you a little bit, just an overview so you'll understand. We offer 6 different parent-to-parent support programs. And we offer trainings, but I want you to get kind of a picture of what we do now so that you can kind of see how this fits in, because we have lots of different contracts and grants. So our work is not just what folks might be, and PTIs all over the U.S. provide services differently.
Family Connection is the parent training and information center for the state of South Carolina. We are the largest family-serving organization in our state, offering programs and trainings to all 46 counties at no cost to families. Our employees are parents of children or youth with a disability, chronic health condition, or behavioral health diagnosis. Our services include collaborating with parents on how to prepare for special education meetings, including the Individualized Education Plan, 504, and Individualized Family Service Plan. Assisting parents in navigating the systems of medical care and insurance coverage for their children with disabilities or special health care needs. Matching parents seeking information and support with mentor parents, and providing programs and services addressing a variety of needs. We host workshops, conferences, webinars, and trainings for parents, youth, and professionals throughout the year. Our staff offers one-on-one assistance to increase parent and family understanding of the education process. Having a child with a disability or special healthcare needs means parents face questions about medical care, insurance, and service options. Our healthcare team answers questions regarding Medicaid, TEFRA, appeals, and managed care information. We can provide applications and support in person or over the phone. For more than 30 years, Family Connection has been making connections, raising awareness, and promoting inclusion for those with disabilities or specialized healthcare needs. Family Connection is there for every milestone of a child's journey from birth to adulthood.
So this video actually has just recently been made, because when you're a new PTI and you're working to do, you're implementing and doing what you're doing, it takes some time to actually define, measure, and we've been in business a long time, but not doing the educational work. Oh, I'm like, who's going to turn it? Here it is. No, stop. There we go. So why the VAP? Like I said, we were a new PTI. There are no, as you all are talking about, and as we've learned like this week too, there are currently no standardized parent-centered training curricula, right? So there's not like a playbook of, hey, this is the job requirement. Here are the competencies. Here are even like the programs, because every state and every center delivers programming in a different way to meet the needs in their state. But when you're new and you're trying to do that, and you don't want to mess up, you don't want to be accused of practicing law, because that's a big deal, right? Some of the goals that we wanted is that we wanted school districts to work with us collaboratively. Our goals that we wanted an evidence-based or evidence-informed parent advocacy training. And those, like I said, prior to that, they weren't coming out out of the woodwork and people saying, here, this is what you need to do. And here are the people that you need to hire. What I realized very quickly, however, is that it was really no longer, we had to look at if you were going to work in our educational world, whether you're going to be the trainer, whether you're going to be in a one-on-one program, that the information around education and education support we were going to have to look at what do they need to know and how are they going to do that? What are the parameters around whether, everybody calls the PTI, and I was told they're going to call you because they want somebody to go to an IP meeting with them, right? We didn't do that. We didn't offer that service in like the first 3-4 years. And these are 5-year grants. So because I wanted to be very mindful about how we delivered that, because we're not, like SPAN, for instance, who, have a long history, or even our other partners here in South Carolina. We have a CPRC, and they've been doing that for a long time, very targeted. So I went looking for this and honestly just kind of came across, hey, here is this volunteer advocacy program, and we're willing to give you the curriculum. And at the time, I don't even think that I knew that there was money that might be attached to it, but honestly, I didn't really care because I couldn't find what I was looking for. And if you can work as a center, if you have an idea and you're looking for something, I have found it to be really, really helpful. And most researchers are perfectly willing to provide you with their information and to work alongside of you so that you can make sure that the work that you're doing is evidence informed. So how did we implement the VAC? So remember, we're looking for a training to begin with, and it had that volunteer component to it. We added, so what we did was we decided to have 2 of our staff members, our director of training and one of our family education specialists who had recently been hired, who had a background in special ed, be the 2 people that were trained by Vanderbilt in order to be able to understand the curriculum itself. And what we realized, first of all, was that when you have a big curriculum like that, things are very different state to state. Laws are very different state to state. Like our transition age is 13 in South Carolina. That's not what federally it is. So, we had to take some time up front before we could use it to add our state specific information. Also, the content, I'm not kidding. You printed it out and it was like this thick, right? So, in order to think about, okay, how are we going to use this? That's a lot of content to go out. And I think some of the questions earlier were like, oh gosh, how do you engage volunteers? Because we're still thinking volunteers for 12 weeks, 3 hours a week, over the course of half of a school semester. So that was something that we looked at up front. And these are the things that we said that we would do. We would recruit parent volunteers. But as you ask, how are we going to screen them? Who's ready to do that work? As an organization and a nonprofit, I'm responsible and liable for what you're saying for me, right? So I immediately bucked that. I'm like, all right. But, and that was one of the things that we were looking at as an organization. What is the scope of practice? And the training, we decided to train our current staff first. And so the training that we did, we condensed it, we adapted it. We worked with Dr. Burke to do that so that we weren't taking away any of the fidelity to the model of the training. And it took us 2 full days or more to then train our family engagement specialists who are already affiliated with our organization. And then the idea was that they would graduate and be matched with up to 4 parents in order to get the, be with the grant requirements. So what we learned was that at the same time, all of the questions that you all asked were questions that we were asking and providing back to the researchers. We're like, and this is Amy Holbert. This might not, those of you that live, this might be perfectly okay. Like Dr. Goldman said, this is a curriculum. They were testing the curriculum first. Does the curriculum work? Is it providing you with the information? It provides you great information. And so we still use the curriculum for onboarding our own staff, for helping to develop competencies. What are the things around special education do you need to have to do this work? But we were able to, but we did not want the initial support parents to go out and go to an IEP meeting by themselves. So those first few, we had our staff go and attend those meetings with them initially to meet the requirements of the grant. And then we no longer use volunteers. So at the same time, an unintentional consequence of our working with Vanderbilt and the University of Illinois is that we were able to develop our current education partner program, which so many of you already have. So as PTIs, they encourage us to have parent advocacy trainings, leadership trainings, and then also this one-on-one kind of work that can often be what ends up costing you the most money, right? So I'm going to give you some of those results after you hear about the CPRC's experience with how they implemented in a very different way, but some of the same themes actually come through.
Thank you. So as I said earlier, unfortunately, representatives from CETA couldn't join us, but what I will be sharing with you today is based on information that they did share during the follow-up interview after they had completed the training. So I also want to just clarify one point. The volunteer part of the volunteer advocacy project just is that pay it forward model idea that after completing the training should go on to advocate for families at no cost. So it doesn't mean that you can't be somebody who is a professional in the field. So that was the original intention, just to make sure that's clear. So CETA, as I mentioned, is a CPRC in the New York, New Jersey area. And as we know, CPRCs are more focused on supporting a specific part of the population. And so CETA is an organization that is focused on supporting the Korean-speaking community in that area and a smaller organization. So 9 staff as opposed to, remind me how many? 40. So looking at this implementation within a smaller scale organization. And so they were able to complete their version of the VAP with 12 participants who were all Korean, of course. 67% were college graduates, so a bit more than half, and 75% had an annual income of greater than $70,000. So these are who they were. They primarily used the $5,000 in seed funding to support their facilitation team. So to provide some funding for this one facilitator and one project assistant who could help with preparing materials and other things for the training. They, I think similar to Family Connection, provided all of the training sessions internally. So different than the way the VAP was originally implemented, rather than bringing in experts from other organizations. Content and training was provided by those who work at the organization, other than one session on discipline where somebody was brought in from an outside organization. And they ran their sessions more similarly to the original structure of it. So 3-hour sessions run over the course of 12 weeks. And they did, however, split up the way the training was provided. So 5 webinars and 7 in-person sessions. So they could alternate and give people a break from the travel that was needed to get to the sessions. They also incorporated a 5-item quiz for each session, so they could do a check for understanding, make sure participants were getting what was intended out of each session. They needed to update the materials for the New York, New Jersey context, as I think we all know, for any state, there are going to be those differences. That's really important to go through any materials and make sure they are specific to state laws, state policies. This is one of the challenges with developing a consistent, cohesive program that can be used across the country, because we do have these differences. And then, of course, beyond that, they did need to translate all of the materials, all of the reading readings, any supporting activities, our research materials into Korean. So that was additional time and energy that needed to go into that. They incorporated some technology that, we use basic technology for webcasting, but we didn't incorporate a lot of other technology in our training. And so they used some group messaging apps to set that group up together so they could communicate between sessions, they could talk during sessions, they could send reminders about readings that were assigned. And they also decided to add a group project and discussion on family empowerment. This was something that the facilitators reflected that within this community, they didn't think that family empowerment was really a concept that participants were going to be familiar with. And so they felt that it would be useful to set aside some time to give them the opportunity to talk about this idea and to work together. And so they worked in groups of 3 to 4 based on where they lived. And they took one session and created a poster of their ideas about empowerment, both by advocating for themselves and their children and for other families. And they presented these ideas to the full group the following week. And I want to share with you all a quote from that Sita shared during our interview about this particular activity, because I think it's pretty powerful. So I'm not going to read it to you, but I'll give you all a moment to read this quote. So I think the way this quote ends really shows it's powerful, the impact of this activity for them. And so we were really happy to see that they felt that they were able to adapt the training in a way like this, where they could incorporate an activity that was going to be beneficial for their particular community and participants. And so similar, I think, to Family Connection, there was this unexpected outcome. It wasn't something going into it that they were aiming for, but there was this sense of community that was built. This idea that it's not just me focusing on my child or me, eventually going and advocating for others, but really building this sense of community and wanting to pull the rest of the family in and talk to neighbors about it and really engage the community in this sense. They reported that they really wanted to continue doing it, but they weren't sure where the money was going to come from. And so, that's of course always a long-term concern. And this need for technical support. So similar themes of, great, gone through the training, you have this knowledge, but there really isn't a whole lot of time for practicing and applying those skills. And so as a lot of these questions and concerns have come up, we always are asking those questions of, right, how do you make sure they're ready, or they're not going out and doing something that's going to harm a student more than it helps them or hurt a family. And so definitely that awareness up there is a need for more practice, more time for application. And then lastly, some questions about culturally responsiveness of some of the measures, some of the materials that are really important to continue addressing. Okay, and very briefly, I know this is not the most exciting, but our quantitative findings, the quick overview is that, yay, it worked. So I can say everybody should go ahead and do this because Family Connection and Sita could do it. So both agencies implemented with fidelity, meaning that other than the adaptations, which we wanted to be made, those key components were implemented, were done in the ways that were intended, in the ways that we know they need to work. We saw similar statistically significant increases. And so I know, basically it worked. They learned. Similar to the research on the VAP, we saw positive outcomes. So their knowledge went up, their empowerment went up, their comfort with advocacy increased, and their sense of connection to their community, specifically the disability community, increased. So that's the takeaway from here. And then lastly, they were satisfied. So they liked it, which is of course important as well. We want you to learn, we want you to gain knowledge and confidence, but we want you to like the experience that you were participating in. So the final thing we want to discuss, and we hope, I know everybody it's like that time of day, it's warm in here, so we hope we can make this interactive. But we want to talk a little bit just about lessons learned, and hopefully some recommendations if anybody is interested in trying something like this so that we can discuss those issues. But my summary is that it works. And so it seems like a really natural collaboration for community organizations to be the ones who already have the infrastructure in place, have these strong connections, and would be a natural partner in running trainings like this. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amy, and please join her in discussion.
That's okay. Sorry. All right. So what we learned, our approach and our need was different than an established CPRC, right? So you can use it different ways. But some of the things that we did learn, and I think the themes were similar, was that first of all, you need to have the expertise already on your team. If you don't have it, you need to bring it in there because it's really complicated information. And it's not just, hey, let me give you this, VAP, and you've got this curriculum of 12 sessions and how to teach somebody about special education and how to advocate. And you need to plan that sufficient time up front. So, if you were interested in receiving the full curriculum, what you would need to do is plan for the time to either, if you have a curriculum already that you use, look at, are there things that from this curriculum you could adapt and, maybe add to what you already offer in your own training. But you're going to have some of that time up front. And if this is, if this is you want to offer a new parent leadership training or a new parent advocacy training, you don't have to do the part where you're training the volunteers to be the people that go out, right? So, but you'll still need to think about and be mindful and planful in your budgets and things like that. And I think like was brought up before, even if you're training your own staff or you're training parents or, folks that you're going to train parents you're going to then pay a stipend, whatever way you're doing it, you need to have a way to monitor who those folks are, if it's not someone from your agency or organization, to be able to collect the information, provide them with the support. And I think that was information that we both gave back, both organizations gave back to the researchers, that concept of scaling advocacy like this is great. It's awesome, but we all know that you have to be able to track the outcomes and make sure that the information that's being disseminated is doing that within the scope of what you want folks to do, and that they have the information you want them to have. And it's very, very clear to develop those, like you had mentioned, those clear definitions for the expectations of the trainees, what their scope of practice is, where it's supposed to go, how far they go, what are the supports that they're allowed to provide, what they call themselves, their duties and roles. And for me, and it kind of got mixed into as we were preparing for this talk, one of the unintentional consequences, which was great for me, is the way I took this training is that we're using it. We recorded each one. We reduced it from 12 to 10, and then we recorded those. And we use it now as onboarding of our new staff, right? So that we know that every staff person has the same information, right? It's kind of like a duh, but we didn't have it, right? And throughout the years, there's not that standardized, hey, if you're going to work for a parent center at Family Connection, it's no longer okay to just be a parent of a child with a disability, because this information is so complicated. Right. Also, so what we did, we used it and we took those 1 hour session. We took those sessions and we reduced it and broke up the information into 1 hour trainings so that we were able to also offer that across our state as part of the work that we do in training families across South Carolina, or providers. A lot of providers, we do a lot of training for providers because they don't know this information either. Right. And we have clearly defined when we did move forward with our education partner program, we are able to define what is your education partner. We are a support partner. We are not an educational advocate. We are not an attorney. We are not going to speak on your behalf. We are not going to do these things because that's outside. And these are for the people that work for me, right? But in order to do that, if you tell a family or you offer to provide I'm going to provide, and I'm going to go potentially to an IEP meeting with you, you need to make sure you clearly are able to communicate that to that parent as well, right? Because they can't call Family Connection for this program and say, hey, I have an IEP meeting tomorrow. Can you send someone with me? The answer is absolutely not. No, because we have narrowed down in our program, we have measurable goals and outcomes. So we have a pre and we have a post. They need to go and meet with our person. We'll even make a home visit. We'll meet you at the library or whatever to go through the information, go through your child's IEP, discuss eligibility, provide them the education that oftentimes they don't have, right? Because like myself, like even though I'm a social worker and I've referred people to information all the time, until it happens to you, you don't even know the right questions to ask. So that's the beauty of being able to also provide that parent support. And we have the pre-meeting. And then during the meeting, we provide support. And like Sven mentioned, there are times when we're sitting there. We've already gone through, we've had the parent prioritize. What are they, what's their primary concern? What are their concerns about the meeting? What do they want their outcomes to be? Because it might very well, and oftentimes it's different than what the school wants. And so we work with them so that they can advocate on their own behalf, which is what the VAP also teaches you to do. We teach our staff to do that, to then work with the family. And then we will do a debriefing post-school meeting and ask them, to follow up with the family, because oftentimes you leave a meeting, you don't know what the heck's going to happen next, right? So that we can help them through that process. And the difference between us and an educational advocate is that we're no cost. If the family then wants to go ahead, there are times when all of there are times that families need an attorney. There are times that families need more than what this is going to offer them. But I said this helped us come up with and define those clear expectations, which are not written in any book for this kind of work. And being new to this arena, I did not realize in 2015 that anybody in South Carolina can hang up their own shingle and say, I'm a special education advocate, and then they can charge our families hundreds of dollars. And they may or may not have the right information, right? Because we don't have any kind of like monitoring or system, there's not a systemic type of program or monitoring for that. And you got to have funding, right? So you got to have funding. We went from 19 full-time people. Now we have 40. I have 18 people that do this program in particular. The program, of course, needs further evaluation, considering some national dissemination. I have worked with lots of TA centers that OSEP provides funding for across the United States. Being new, it's great. But even if you're not a new PTI or not a new CPRC, or, you're not new to your early intervention system, that information is out there. And a lot of times you'll get really good at no cost support or training for yourselves and for your staff. Also, the curriculum itself is not very family friendly. I said this nicely to the researchers. It is very dense, cumbersome information. So if you were going to take this information and adapt it for your own use, then, really looking at how do you make it so it's understandable and that families understand, in addition to making it culturally more sensitive for the variety of families that you might be using it if you're using it as a training. And then we would like to see developing competencies either for staff or, like you said, for those volunteers, so that, as Dr. Goldman mentioned, like she was actually doing the assigning of folks. So they would train the volunteers at Vanderbilt, and then she would have an idea about who maybe had the expertise that if a family called, that she could then match them, right? But I think in a freestanding, nonprofit organization, need to clearly have some described competencies for what kind of information and knowing that they're going to carry out their and stay within the scope of practice that you as your organization would like to see. And I believe the ultimate goal of any of the work that we're doing in parent centers is truly to empower those families with the information, because we're not going to be there every day with them forever, right? So our goal is that we give them the information so that they can then be the best advocates for their own child. And as I was doing this, and I told Dr. Goldman, I said, honestly, when a family calls us up and they want someone to go to an IEP meeting, and my folks, we can put them through the program. If they don't need us to go to the IEP meeting with them after meeting with us, to me, that's the win, right? That's the win, because they felt comfortable enough and empowered enough to know how, and we've modeled that, that communication and help them build those relationships in their child's, whatever system that their child's experiencing at that point. But I do think that if you are currently providing a program or training like this, that it would be beneficial to anybody to work with and take a look at the curriculum itself. I think you might see some of the same things that those of you that have done this work, you're like, yeah, you know, where is this? Because at a university center, you know, they have to start at the beginning of actually studying it. And then does the curriculum give you the information you want to work with? And then you look at how do you implement it and what's being implemented, and is that working, and what are the safety measures, and what do you have to do with that? So I think what we'll do now is we can take any questions or comments for either of us. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Amy. I was curious when you mentioned about the literacy levels, because we are a CPRC, and so many of the families that reach out to us do have their own disabilities. And when we look at equity and access to content, I'm curious how much work you may have had to do to modify this. I mean, are we going to accommodate the content? Are we going to modify it so they still get to the standard of what we're trying to support them with? So what was your experience as you looked at your literacy levels, or how much work did you have to put into modifying that dense, smart content?
Great question. The amount of money in the grant would not have covered the amount of time that it takes to do that. Honest to goodness, whether you're the CPRC and you're having to translate everything or come up with different types of measures. The two staff members that were assigned to learn the training both had special education backgrounds. So they'd either been teachers or had one had a master's in literacy. And so honestly, it took them several weeks to go through to even be able to feel comfortable teaching it back to our staff. Just because, it's dense and our staff, we were new. So I still had really good staff that were great parents that are still on staff that might not have the master's in literacy. They're, might have a high school diploma. That doesn't mean that they're not doing this work. That's part of trying to find a standardized curriculum, right, that can meet the needs of the diverse parents that you have on your staff or that you need to work with. So it took probably, and I'm going to guess, and probably Suzanne Wingert is our director of training. And so she was spearheading. No, I won't say, nobody said that. Nobody said that. But I mean, we took staff time, right? Because I'm a nonprofit. I have to account for all of the time folks doing it. But I think that Sally Baker and Melissa Sanders on our team, they actually spent probably 2 to 3 weeks was going back and making sure that what we adapted was within our own state guidelines. It had nothing to do with with the VAP. It had to do with, I wanted to make sure that if we trained you to do the training in Charleston, that you were still providing the same training in Greenville and it was accurate, right? And so it was the review time, and having experts in our organization, in our state, to make sure we weren't out there disseminating, information that wasn't correct. And so a lot of this, though, for us is like building materials that we had to begin with, but then also now that we have adapted, how do you do that? How much does it cost? And then having our own tip sheets, our own trainings, our own one-on-one programs. Yes, ma'am. Hang on one second, though. What? Try it again. Okay. And hang on one second.
I know you spoke a little bit about the different, technical courses that you offer when you're doing the trainings. What, are you using to determine what content or what training specifically you want to offer?
That's a great question. So we didn't change, because remember now we took the information kind of apart for parents to offer webinars. So and I don't know, Dr. Goldman can speak maybe because I don't remember all of the titles, but we would take that. I'm sorry, I'll go over here. We would take that and modify. Okay, here's what present levels or whatever are, and often break it down into kind of a manageable amount of information. But once you learn the training and you have it, that's all that is for you all, right? So they give that to you, provide you the support, and then you can look at that. And initially we did work with Dr. Burke though to say, hey, look, because I think they wanted to combine some of the, maybe the history of disability wasn't going to take a whole, 3 hours or something. And so what does she recommend that you can combine? We didn't mess with the fidelity of the information. Does that make sense? Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say?
Okay. Well, one thing I'll come back to, I think, is the question we were talking about in terms of making sure that this is accessible for a variety of participants. And I think because our participants were not restricted just to parents. And so in a sense, we always did have a full range in that sense of people coming in, different prior knowledge of special education, of disabilities, different personal experiences, some self-advocates. And so it's dense material for sure, right? We know special ed law is dense, and that's why we need this. That's why we need people to support and people to advocate. But trying to make sure that the teaching activities were engaging and not just, I'm speaking to you from a PowerPoint, but that, universal design, making sure that there were different ways to access the materials. And so while Amy joked about, the binder, it's this big, but it's not intended for you to go and read all of that. And it's kind of this is a resource for you to leave this training with this information and to have the enough understanding of it that you can go back to it when you have a question about one of these particular topics, to be able to go back to the slides, go back to the resources and see that. Yeah.
So my question is, how do families know that this actually exists? That there are these trained up parent advocates that can support them at IEP meeting?
Yeah, so that's, I think it comes down to the disability community in different areas. And so it was, I think once it was created and an established program, if, families are looking, they're calling around, every state is a little bit different in, the different numbers that you call and the way you access resources. And is there one common place where you go and then they refer you out? But I can tell you that 5 years after I left Tennessee, I still get phone calls from parents. Like they still somehow find my phone number associated with the VAP and call, and I say, I can connect you with somebody else. But so I think, it's a small but strong and mighty community. And so people hear and they know. And I think especially when someone's in that moment where they say, I need help and I need help right now, they can go on the internet and find it, or get in touch with the right person and find it. But that's something I think that is very different than the replications that were done, is that, the USED at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center is a very different organization. And always, we are always exploring those different ways of, we collaborated with all of these other organizations, but should this be should the ARC, for a while, the ARC were the ones we were saying, you need to manage the calls. Like that makes more sense, right? And so, but it's hard because, there's never enough resources, there's never enough people. And so in the end, you just want to provide the help that you're able to provide, whatever that's going to look like.
I think ideally in the perfect world, it would be nice that it would be just one organization that kind of leads that charge, so that you can be collaborative, right, with other partners for the referral piece. That's that one organization that's really leading that charge, that's monitoring, ensuring that these, what I like to refer as servant leaders, because these are servant leaders in the community doing great work, that they have a consistency and someone that they know, so they can continue to keep, developing those skill sets. And of course, as we know, in every state, there are different trends. And so really taking the wholeness of what's trending here and how can we start assisting these families and building that capacity. So I think it's really great work. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm gonna one additional follow-up, and then I'm gonna come to you, but to the question about the content and how do you decide what goes into this? And thank you for bringing that up. And so while there are certainly those core topics that you're not gonna mess with, you need those in there, we were constantly updating each year. So, Tennessee would do something weird where they'd come up with a whole new system for, how they were gonna provide supports for students with learning disability, and would say, hey, can you come and present so we can make sure that our trainees are learning about this. We also implemented I forget what we called it, but this need for ongoing professional development. So rather than you come, you do it, okay, you're part of this network now, you're invited back every year. And I think another really nice and easy thing is if you're running it every fall, we would invite all of our graduates. They were welcome to come back every single year. So if there's a particular topic, I'd send out the calendar and say, here's what we're doing. Feel free to log in if there's a particular content area that you want, and really easy.
I was just wondering, what is the future of the program? They were involved through a grant, but how do other organizations across the country? I think PTIs are like the perfect place because I work at a PTI and I'm a parent who is like completely self-taught. I had no, and in Colorado, there's nothing formal for advocates. All advocates are self-taught and self-regulated. So what is the future of this? How do people get a hold of it?
We were joking about this earlier, that she said she's going to refer them to me, and I said I'm going to refer them to Megan Burke. So Megan is a really amazing, wonderful person. She's one of those like super women who just does it all. And so she is at the University of Illinois and does just amazing amounts of work in the community and also in the research world, and is always more than happy, so generous, and really just wanting to benefit the community. And so we want to thank lots of people who helped us, but I also want to share our contact information. And so you're welcome. Please email both or either of us with any questions or comments, but you're more than welcome if you would like to get more information and might be interested in accessing the training information. You can email me and I can get it to you or put you in touch with Megan, who's really the one who, this is one of her babies. She has real babies, but then this is also one of her children. So definitely please reach out. And this paper is about to be published. And so we're really excited to get this information out there as well to more of the academic community to show that the great work that's being done with our partner organizations. So thank you so much for coming. We'll stay around if anybody has questions, and thank you for coming to this final session of the conference. We appreciate it.